My own daughter stood on my porch, looked me dead in the eyes, and called me a dirt poor old fool who didn't deserve to keep his own land. She wanted my vineyard for her fiancé's bankrupt empire. Posted a podcast episode mocking me to 550,000 listeners, and gave me 2 weeks to clear out. What she didn't know was that the dirt under her designer boots was worth $130 million. And by the time the Napa Valley Wine Auction was over, I didn't just take back my land. I erased everything she thought she had. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't even raise my voice. I walked into my wine cellar, opened a door my daughter has never once asked about, and made 3 phone calls. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because this story starts 35 years ago, when a 26-year-old carpenter made a promise to himself about the difference between giving someone everything and teaching them to value anything. That promise would cost my daughter more than she ever imagined. Most people look at me and see exactly what my daughter Megan sees. A 61-year-old man in muddy rubber boots, a faded Carhartt jacket, and dirt permanently lodged under his fingernails. Someone who drives a 2006 Dodge Ram with rust spots on the fender and 220,000 miles on the odometer. I buy my clothes at Tractor Supply. My idea of a nice dinner is a steak I grill myself on a 20-year-old Weber in the backyard. When I show up to events in Napa Valley, people look right through me like I'm part of the landscaping. Megan Calloway Drake, 29 years old, 550,000 podcast listeners. On her show, Living Elevated, beauty and wellness influencer with brand deals that paid her more in a month than most people make in a year. And absolutely convinced that her father was an embarrassment she needed to manage. "Dad, you literally smell like grape juice," she told me last spring when I showed up to a charity luncheon hosted by her fiancé's family. Julian's mother is going to think I was raised in a barn. Julian Drake III, heir to Drake Vineyards, a $250 million wine empire, drove a $180,000 Porsche, wore cufflinks that cost more than my truck, the kind of man who called a vineyard an asset portfolio and called dirt terroir only when it made him sound sophisticated. The first sign I was losing my daughter came 8 months ago. She started referring to my vineyard in conversations as the family land. Not Dad's farm. Not the old place where I grew up. The family land, as if it had always belonged to some collective that she happened to be part of. Then it became future development property. Then just the land. When Julian and I get married, we're obviously going to need the vineyard, she announced over dinner one evening. Her voice was casual, practiced, like she'd rehearsed the line in front of a mirror. We're thinking a luxury wellness retreat, farm-to-table dining, meditation spaces, boutique accommodations. Julian's team already has preliminary designs. Preliminary designs for my vineyard. The one I'd spent 35 years building, from 12 acres of dead weeds into something that made the earth sing. I set down my fork. "What about the vines, Megan?" She looked at me like I'd asked about the weather on Mars. "What about them? You want to pull them up?" "Dad, grapevines aren't exactly a growth industry for someone your age. Julian says the land is worth 3 times more as a retreat than as a working vineyard. You could retire somewhere quieter, maybe Sedona, or one of those little towns in Oregon where people go to slow down. Retire. Somewhere quieter. As if 35 years of my life could be packed into a U-Haul and shipped to a town where nobody knew my name. The second sign came 3 months ago, when Megan recorded episode 147 of her podcast, Living Elevated. The title was, "When Your Family Holds You Back." I listened to the entire 42 minutes sitting in my truck in the driveway. My daughter's voice, smooth and confident and completely sure of itself, filled the cab like poison. My dad's basically a glorified farmer who got lucky with one piece of land. He doesn't understand what Julian and I are building. He thinks because he's been growing grapes for 30-something years that makes him some kind of expert on property management. But there's a difference between working land and building wealth. And my dad has only ever known how to work. 550,000 people heard that. Her producer had titled the segment, From soil to strategy. The comments were enthusiastic. Girl, take what's yours. Your dad sounds sweet, but clueless. Some people just don't know when to let go. Megan screenshotted the worst ones and texted them to me. See? Even strangers get it, Dad. I'm not being ungrateful. I'm being realistic. I never responded to that text. I just saved it. I saved all of them. Every screenshot, every comment, every podcast episode where my daughter reduced 35 years of my life to a punchline about a farmer who got lucky. What Megan didn't know, what none of them knew, was what was behind that iron door in my wine cellar. And the 3 phone calls I'd make before sunrise would teach my daughter the difference between dirt and roots. What Megan never realized, what never once crossed her perfectly curated mind, was that I knew exactly how much her lifestyle cost. Not in some vague fatherly way. I knew to the penny. $8,500 a month for her penthouse apartment on Telegraph Hill in San Francisco. The kind of place with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Bay Bridge and a doorman who called her Miss Calloway every morning like she'd earned the address. $2,500 for her monthly expenses. Utilities, gym membership at Equinox. The subscription boxes that showed up every week like clockwork. $2,000 for discretionary spending. $13,000 a month. Every single month. For 8 years. In her world, she earned all of it. I was just the lucky farmer who happened to have enough saved from a good grape harvest to keep the lights on. My dad helps out a little. I heard her tell Julian's mother at a garden party last spring. It's sweet. Really. He doesn't have much. But he does what he can. He does what he can. $13,000 a month. And she described it the way you'd describe a neighbor bringing over a casserole. The event was a charity luncheon at the Drake family estate in Sonoma. White linen tables under oak trees, a string quartet playing Vivaldi, and wine that cost more per glass than I spend on groceries in a week. I wore my cleanest pair of jeans and a button-down shirt I'd ironed myself that morning. It was the nicest thing I owned that wasn't covered in vine dust. Megan spotted me from across the lawn and rushed over. Not with excitement. With damage control. Dad. She whispered through a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. Julian's parents are here. Please don't talk about soil composition or fermentation temperatures or anything that makes you sound like you work for a living. I work for a living because I do work for a living. You know what I mean. Just be charming. Be simple. Simple. My daughter wanted me to be simple. She introduced me to Catherine Drake near the dessert table. Catherine was 60 years old, immaculate in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my truck. And she had the kind of smile rich people wear when they're being patient with someone beneath them. This is my father, Hank, Megan said. She placed her hand on my arm the way you'd hold a leash. A simple farmer. Very salt of the earth. How charming, Catherine said. She looked at my hands, at the calluses and the permanent dirt lines, and I watched her mentally file me under harmless. A man your age must be looking forward to some rest. All that physical labor. I enjoy it, I said. Catherine tilted her head like I'd said something exotic. Well, that's lovely. Julian's father always says the best thing about land is knowing when to let someone else develop it. Richard Drake materialized beside his wife holding a glass of something that probably cost $40 a pour. He was 63. Silver-haired, impeccably tailored, and he had the confident posture of a man who believed his own net worth made him interesting. Hank, he said, shaking my hand with the kind of grip that was firm enough to be a statement. Megan tells us you've been farming the same plot for quite some time. Admirable dedication. 35 years, I said. Richard nodded the way people nod when they've already stopped listening. Have you given much thought to what happens next? Land like yours, prime Napa soil, it deserves a strategic vision. Julian has some wonderful ideas about hospitality integration. Hospitality integration. He meant tearing out my vines and building a spa. I smiled and said nothing. That's what I'd gotten very good at over the past 8 months. Smiling and saying nothing while people planned the future of my land like I was already dead. The breaking point wasn't the luncheon. It wasn't the podcast episode or the Instagram stories, or even the word simple. It was what happened 2 weeks later, when Megan brought Julian to the vineyard for what she called a walkthrough. They arrived in Julian's Porsche, dust billowing behind them on the gravel road like a declaration. Julian stepped out in Italian loafers that had no business being within a mile of agricultural soil. He immediately started measuring distances with his eyes, scanning the vine rows like a developer eyeing a demolition site. "The tasting room could go here," he said, pointing at my oldest block of Cabernet Sauvignon. Vines that were 43 years old. Vines I'd nursed through 3 droughts, 2 freezes, and a wildfire that came within a quarter mile of the property. Megan followed behind him, taking photos on her phone. "For the architects," she explained when she saw me watching. "We want to capture the existing footprint before we redesign." Redesign. My vineyard. My life's work. My 43-year-old vines. Captured for architects, who would turn them into a parking lot for a wellness retreat. Julian walked the entire property in 45 minutes. He didn't ask about the vines. He didn't ask about the soil. He didn't ask about the 27 people who worked that land alongside me, who depended on those grapes for their livelihoods. He asked about setback requirements, zoning variances, and whether the county would approve a helipad. A helipad. On my vineyard. As they were leaving, Megan turned back to me with the look she always used when she was about to say something she'd rehearsed. "Dad, I love you. But you have to be realistic. Julian's family builds empires. You grow grapes. Let the professionals handle this. It's better for everyone. Let the professionals handle this." As if 35 years of coaxing wine from stubborn earth was amateur hour, she climbed into the Porsche. Julian gave me a wave that was more dismissal than goodbye. They drove off, dust settling behind them on my road, on my land, past my vines. I stood there until the sound of the engine disappeared into the valley. Then I walked past the tasting shed, past the fermentation barn, past the old stone wall I'd built with my own hands the summer Megan was born. I walked down into the wine cellar, past the barrels of Cabernet, aging in the cool dark, all the way to the back wall, where an iron door sat heavy and unremarkable in the stone. Megan had never asked about that door. Not once in 29 years. She'd assumed it was a storage closet or an old utility room. Something unimportant. Something beneath her curiosity. She was wrong about that, too. The iron door weighed 1,200 pounds. Hand-forged steel set into a stone frame that had been part of this cellar since 1891. I'd had it installed 19 years ago by a blacksmith in Calistoga who didn't ask questions. The hinges didn't creak. I kept them oiled the same way I kept everything on this property. Quietly and perfectly maintained. Behind the door was a room 14 feet by 20. Stone walls, climate-controlled, lit by 3 monitors on a custom oak desk I'd built myself. Filing cabinets lined the far wall, organized by year, property type, and state. Above the desk hung a framed magazine cover. Wine Spectator, October 2023. The headline read, "The Ghost Vintner, the $100 million man. Nobody knows." The man in the photograph was me. Same rubber boots, same Carhartt jacket, same dirt under the fingernails. I logged into the Callaway Heritage Estates Management portal. The dashboard loaded in 3 seconds. Custom-built software by a tech firm in San Jose. $400,000. Worth every cent. The numbers filled the screens like a quiet symphony. Total acreage: 3,200 acres of premium vineyard land across Napa Valley, Sonoma County, and the Central Coast. 12 operational wineries, shipping to 28 countries. 45 luxury vacation rentals, averaging $600 a night during peak season. A wine brand with 237 international awards, served in Michelin-starred restaurants from San Francisco to Tokyo. Today's gross revenue: 60. $7,412. This week, $412,000. This month, projected $1.7 million. I clicked the tenant management tab. 212 active leases. Scrolled to line 47. Telegraph Hill Penthouse. Unit 12A. San Francisco. Monthly rent, $8,500. Tenant, Megan Calloway. Owner, Calloway Heritage Estates, LLC. My daughter paid rent to me every month and didn't know it. The money left my right pocket and landed in my left. She believed she was living independently in an apartment earned through her podcast and brand deals. She had never once looked at the property management company on her lease. If she had, she would have seen the name Calloway. But Megan didn't ask questions about things she considered beneath her. The story of how I built this is not complicated. It's just long. In 1991, I was 26, working as a Finnish carpenter in Sacramento for $14 an hour. One Sunday I drove to Napa Valley because a coworker said the wine country was beautiful in October. He was right. The hills were golden and purple, the air smelled like crushed fruit and warm earth, and something in my chest shifted like a compass finding north. I found a 12-acre plot on the eastern slope of a hill nobody wanted. Volcanic soil, rocky, dry. A failed Christmas tree farm. The bank was selling it for $35,000. I had $37,000 in savings from 4 years of overtime. Bought the land on a Tuesday. Moved into a trailer by Friday. Planted my first vines that winter with my own hands, row by row. While my back screamed and the neighbors said that carpenter boy doesn't know what he's doing, they were half right. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew how to work. And I knew that land, like wood, reveals its character to people patient enough to listen. First harvest came 3 years later. 47 cases of Cabernet Sauvignon. A wine critic from the San Francisco Chronicle tasted it at a local fair and wrote 3 words that changed my life. Remember this name. I didn't spend the money. I bought more land. Distressed sales, foreclosures, neglected parcels others had abandoned. I fixed them the way I'd fixed old houses. Carefully, slowly, with my own hands. Every dollar went back into the dirt. By 2005, 800 acres and 6 wineries. By 2015, 2,000 acres and 10 wineries. By 2020, 3,200 acres, 12 wineries, 45 vacation properties, and a brand that Forbes called one of the most quietly dominant forces in American wine. Forbes profiled me in 2021. The Invisible Vintner. How a carpenter built $100 million wine empire without anyone noticing. The journalist spent 3 days following me. She couldn't believe I still drove the same truck, still ate lunch at the same taqueria, where a burrito cost $9.50. Why would I change? I told her. The land doesn't care what I drive. Wine Spectator did their cover 2 years later. Wall Street Journal followed. Each used the same phrase. The Ghost Vintner. Total net worth, as of last month, $130 million. Megan had never seen this room. Never asked about the monitors, the filing cabinets, the spreadsheets tracking 212 properties across 15 states. She saw a farmer in rubber boots and decided that was the whole story. I closed the tenant tab and opened a bookmarked URL. Drake Vineyard's annual financial report. Filed with the Napa County Assessor's Office. The document loaded slowly. I read the first line 3 times. Outstanding consolidated debt, $80 million. Current season production shortfall, 60% below projected yield due to extended drought. Lender review status, under evaluation for potential covenant breach. $80 million in debt, 60% production loss. A lender getting nervous. Julian Drake, III, heir to a $250 million empire, was standing on a foundation made of sand. and he wanted my land to fill the hole. I pulled up one more document. An internal email forwarded by a source who owed me a favor. Sender: Richard Drake Sr. Recipient: Julian. Dated 3 weeks ago. 4 sentences. Son, we need the Callaway acreage before fourth quarter or First Pacific will trigger the default clause. The old man won't sell willingly. Use the girl. She trusts you. Use the girl. She trusts you. I read those 6 words until they burned into my memory. Then I turned off the monitors, walked out, and pulled the iron door shut behind me. It sealed with a sound like a vault closing. Above me, the vineyard was dark and quiet. My vines were pulling minerals from ancient volcanic soil, converting sunlight into sugar, doing what they'd done for 43 years without anyone telling them to. My daughter was being used, and the man using her wanted my dirt. 2 weeks after the walkthrough, an invitation arrived. Handwritten on cream-colored stationery, embossed with the Drake family crest. A lion holding a grapevine. I wondered if the lion knew the grapevine was drowning in $80 million of debt. The card read, Dear Hank, we would be honored to host you for an intimate family dinner at our Sonoma estate. An evening to celebrate the future of our families. Saturday, 7 o'clock. Cocktail attire preferred. Cocktail attire preferred. I looked down at my boots. Dirt from that morning's vine inspection still clung to the soles. I figured that counted as accessorizing. I showed up at 7:15 carrying a bottle of wine I'd made myself. No label. No vintage year printed on fancy stock. Just a glass bottle with a handwritten tag that read, Callaway Red, Lot 9. Aged 31 months in American oak. Production cost: about $4. The Drake estate sat on 40 acres of manicured hillside overlooking the Sonoma Valley. The kind of property that looked beautiful from the outside and bankrupt from the inside. Though I was apparently the only person at the table who knew that. A stone driveway lined with imported olive trees led to a Mediterranean-style villa that Richard had built in 2008, right before the recession nearly wiped him out the first time. He'd survived that one. I wasn't sure he'd survive this one. 12 people sat around a long table on the terrace. Crystal glasses, white linen. Candles that flickered against the valley breeze. The wine being poured was Drake Vineyard's Reserve Cabernet. Retail price $120 a bottle. I knew for a fact the grapes came from a parcel Drake leased from a neighboring estate because his own vines hadn't produced enough fruit in 2 years. I set my $4 bottle on the table next to the $120 one. Catherine Drake picked it up, turned it over, read the handwritten tag, and set it down again, without opening it. How artisanal, she said. Richard sat at the head of the table like a king who hadn't yet been told his kingdom was crumbling. He steered the conversation toward what he called strategic land vision, with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 40 years convincing other people to give him things. Hank, he said, leaning forward with his elbows on the table like we were old friends instead of a predator and his target. Land like yours represents a generational opportunity. The wellness tourism market is projected to hit $1.4 trillion globally by 2027. Julian and Megan have a vision that could position the Callaway property at the center of that growth. The Callaway property. Not Hank's vineyard. Not the land I'd spent 35 years building. The Callaway property. Like it was already a line item on a spreadsheet waiting for new ownership. Julian nodded from across the table. We're thinking a full-service destination. Farm-to-table dining using locally sourced ingredients. A meditation center overlooking the valley. Luxury cabins nestled between the vine rows. He paused. Or where the vine rows used to be. Where the vine rows used to be. He said it like pulling up 43-year-old grapevines was the same as rearranging furniture. Megan beamed beside him. She hadn't touched her food. She was too busy photographing the table setting for her Instagram stories. Julian's vision is incredible, Dad. This could put our family on the map. Our family was already on the map. She just hadn't bothered to look at the right map. Catherine turned to me with the expression she reserved for conversations with people she considered charity cases. "Hank, a man your age must think about the future. Farming is physical work. There comes a time when the body simply can't keep up with the land. Wouldn't it be wonderful to know your property was in capable hands while you enjoyed a well-deserved rest?" A well-deserved rest. She meant a rocking chair and a small apartment somewhere I wouldn't embarrass anyone. I smiled. "The land keeps me young, Catherine." She laughed, the kind of laugh that meant she didn't believe me but was too polite to argue with the help. Halfway through dessert, I excused myself to use the restroom. The hallway leading from the terrace past Richard's home office. The door was ajar. I didn't plan to stop, but I heard Julian's voice inside, low and urgent. And something in the tone made my feet go still. "Dad, we're running out of time." Julian was pacing. I could see his shadow moving against the wall through the crack in the door. The drought killed 60% of our yield this season. 60%. If we don't secure new acreage before the end of the quarter, First Pacific is going to trigger the default clause. Richard's voice was calmer, but edged with the kind of steel that comes from a man who has spent his entire life refusing to lose. "Then stop wasting time on dinner parties and get the old man to sign. I don't care how you do it. Use the engagement. Use Megan's emotional leverage. Tell her the land is a wedding gift from her father. Whatever it takes." Julian stopped pacing. "And if he refuses, then we file a claim. Agricultural land disputes take years to resolve. By the time his lawyer figures out what's happening, we'll have the acreage under development and the bank off our backs." I stood in that hallway for exactly 11 seconds, long enough to memorize every word, short enough that no one noticed. I was gone. When I returned to the table, Megan was showing Catherine her engagement ring. Julian was pouring wine with steady hands and an easy smile, as if he hadn't just discussed stealing my land in the next room. Richard raised his glass to me from across the table. "To family," he said. "To family," I replied. And I meant it differently than he did. I left the dinner at 9:45, shook Richard's hand at the door, kissed Megan on the forehead, and climbed into my Dodge Ram. The engine coughed twice before turning over. Through the rearview mirror, I could see the Drake estate lit up like a palace against the dark Sonoma hills. Beautiful on the outside, rotting from within. I pulled onto the highway and dialed Margaret Chen. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was sharp even at 10 o'clock at night. That was why I'd kept her as my attorney for 20 years. "Margaret, it's Hank. I need you to investigate an $80 million loan held by Drake Vineyards. I need to know every property that secures it, every covenant, every default trigger. And Margaret, I need to know if a piece of land in Yountville that Julian Drake promised my daughter is part of that collateral." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "How fast do you need this?" "Before the wine auction." "That's 9 days, Hank." "I know." Another pause. "Are we protecting the land or protecting Megan?" I watched the Drake estate disappear in my mirror. "Both." The text message arrived at 6:45 on a Tuesday morning. I was standing in the vineyard checking the sugar levels in a cluster of Cabernet Sauvignon that would be ready for harvest in 3 weeks. The grapes were perfect. Deep purple, firm skin, the bricks reading exactly where I wanted it. 35 years of learning when to wait and when to act. And the fruit always told me the truth. Unlike my daughter. "Dad, Julian and I have made our decision. You have 2 weeks to clear out your personal things. We're bringing architects to the property on the 15th to begin site assessment for the retreat center. I've already spoken to a relocation specialist who can help you find something suitable in your price range. Please don't make this difficult." My price range. A relocation specialist. Like I was a tenant being politely evicted from my own land. I read the message twice, standing there among the vines with morning dew soaking through my boots and the sun just starting to paint the eastern hills gold. Then I put the phone in my pocket and finished checking the grapes. The sugar content doesn't wait for family drama. The legal documents arrived by courier at 2:15 that afternoon. A manila envelope with Drake and Associates, embossed in gold on the upper left corner. Richard Drake's law firm. The same firm that occupied the third floor of a building in downtown Napa that, as of 18 months ago, was owned by Callaway Heritage Estates. Richard paid rent to my company every month. His secretary processed the check without ever connecting the name on the lease to the farmer whose land her boss was trying to steal. The letter inside was 7 pages long, beautifully formatted. The language was the kind of polite cruelty that only expensive lawyers can produce. "Dear Mr. Callaway," it began. "We are writing on behalf of our clients, Julian Drake III and Megan Callaway Drake, regarding the agricultural property located at the above-referenced address. After careful review of the property's history and current utilization, our clients believe a structured transition of management responsibilities would serve the long-term interests of all parties involved." Structured transition of management responsibilities. They meant taking my land. The letter continued for 6 more pages. Terms like generational stewardship transfer and agricultural succession planning dressed up the theft in language that sounded almost charitable. Page 4 included a financial assessment of my estimated retirement needs based on, and I'm quoting directly, typical agricultural income for an individual of comparable professional background. They estimated I could live comfortably on $2,800 a month. They'd even helpfully identified 3 retirement communities within driving distance of Napa where units started at $1,400 a month. Affordable options for a man in your stage of life, the letter said. Affordable options. For a man worth $130 million. The final page outlined a timeline. Week 1. Inventory and organize personal belongings for transport. Week 2. Coordinate with relocation specialist for housing placement. Week 3. Finalize property management transfer documents. Week 4. Complete physical transition from property. They'd given me a month to erase 35 years. Generous of them. I called Megan at 4 o'clock. She answered on the 3rd ring, sounding distracted. I could hear Julian's voice in the background and what sounded like an architect's presentation playing on a laptop. "Megan, we need to talk about these documents." "Dad, there's nothing to talk about. Julian's father had his best attorneys draft those papers. Everything is legal and fair." Legal and fair. Taking someone's property through manufactured pressure is neither legal nor fair. Megan. She sighed. The kind of sigh she'd perfected over the past year. The one that said, "My father is being difficult again." "Dad, be realistic. You're 61 years old. You can't maintain a working vineyard forever. The property taxes alone must be crushing you." The property taxes on my primary vineyard were $93,000 annually. Callaway Heritage Estates paid them from an account that generated more than that amount every 37 hours. "Megan, do you know how I pay those taxes? Savings, I assume. Or maybe you took out a loan against the property." "Dad, that's exactly why this transition makes sense. Julian's family can absorb those costs without blinking. Without blinking. The family that was $80 million in debt and 60% short on grape production was going to absorb my costs without blinking. What if I said no? Dad, Julian's father knows land law better than anyone in Napa. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're trying to do this the nice way. End. The nice way. As opposed to the other way, which apparently involved attorneys and manufactured legal pressure. "Megan, do you know how much this land is worth?" She paused. I could almost hear her calculating. "It's a nice vineyard, Dad, but let's be honest. Without Julian's investment and vision, it's just dirt. Good dirt, but dirt. Just dirt. 3,200 acres of the finest volcanic terroir in California. Dirt. Just dirt," I repeated. "Yes, Dad. Dirt. And dirt needs money to become something. Julian has the money. You have the dirt. It's a perfect partnership. I let the silence stretch for 5 full seconds. Then I said goodnight and hung up. 20 minutes later, Megan posted an Instagram story. I watched it from my kitchen table while eating a bowl of soup I'd made from tomatoes in my garden. The video showed her standing in my vineyard. Golden hour light, making her look like she belonged on a magazine cover. The caption read, "Time for the next generation to build something real. Some vines need to be pulled up to make room for growth. Hashtag new beginnings. Hashtag legacy." 12,000 likes in 4 hours. The comments were a choir of validation. "Yes, Queen, take what's yours. Old farmers hoarding land they can't even use properly. Your generation's turn now. Growth over tradition always. Some vines need to be pulled up." My daughter was talking about my 43-year-old Cabernet Sauvignon vines the way someone talks about weeds in a sidewalk crack. I finished my soup, washed the bowl, dried it, and put it back in the cabinet. Then I walked through the cellar, past the barrels aging in the dark, and opened the iron door. The monitors hummed to life. I sat down, opened a blank document, and began to type. Line 1. Margaret Chen. Documents ready. In 48 hours. Ironclad. Line 2. Daniel Ortiz. Expedite Hargrove deal. 3 properties. Cash. 24-hour close. Line 3. Reserve table at Meadowood Resort. Napa Valley Wine Auction. Saturday. The harvest was coming. And it was going to be a season nobody in this valley would ever forget. I have watched 4,700 sunrises from this vineyard. I know exactly how the light moves across the eastern ridge, how it touches the highest vines first, then spills down the slope like honey poured slow. Most mornings I stand there with coffee and silence and let the land wake up around me. This morning was different. This morning I was in the cellar behind the iron door before the first trace of gray appeared on the horizon. 3 calls to make. 3 moves on a board my daughter didn't even know existed. First call. 5:12 a.m. Margaret Chen. She answered on the first ring. Lawyers like Margaret don't sleep the way normal people sleep. They rest with one eye open and a legal brief within arm's reach. "Margaret, it's Hank. Tell me what you found." "Everything." Margaret's voice had the tone she used when she'd discovered something that would change the shape of a case. The Drake loan is structured through First Pacific Lending. $80 million, variable rate. Secured against 5 properties. 4 of them are Drake Vineyards parcels in Sonoma and Carneros. The 5th is a 16-acre estate in Yountville. I already knew about the Yountville property. Julian had shown it to Megan 3 months ago. Walked her through the gardens, pointed at the oak trees, told her this would be their home after the wedding. Megan had posted a video tour on her podcast with the caption, "Where our roots will grow." Her listeners loved it. Margaret, who owns the Yountville property? On paper, Julian Drake III. But here's the issue, Hank. The title has a lien attached. First Pacific holds a security interest as part of the consolidated Drake loan package. If Drake defaults, the bank takes the Yountville property along with everything else. Julian promised that house to my daughter. I know. And there's more. Margaret paused. The kind of pause that means the next sentence is a grenade. I ran a secondary search on Julian's personal financial records. He has a separate debt obligation, $2.3 million, owed to Apex Financial Services, which is a collections intermediary for the Bellagio Resort and Casino in Las Vegas. I sat very still. The monitors hummed in the dark room. Somewhere above me, the vines were heavy with fruit that had spent an entire season converting sunlight into sugar. Julian has a gambling debt. Had. It was $2.3 million as of 6 months ago. He consolidated it through Apex to avoid direct casino collection. And Hank, here's the part that matters. He secured that personal debt with the only unencumbered asset he had access to. The Yountville property. The Yountville property. The house he promised Megan. The place where their roots would grow. He double-pledged it? Effectively, yes. The bank holds a lien through the corporate Drake loan. Julian personally pledged it again to cover his gambling losses. If either creditor calls the debt, Megan loses the house, and neither creditor knows about the other's claim. I closed my eyes. My daughter was planning a wedding in a house that was mortgaged twice over by a man who'd lost $2.3 million at a blackjack table and then looked her in the eyes and called it their future. Margaret, I need every document you just described. Ready for presentation. Physical copies and digital. Formatted. For a large screen. For the wine auction? For the wine auction. I'll have everything to you by Thursday. And Hank, this is going to be very public. It's already public. My daughter announced the land transfer to 550,000 podcast listeners. I'm just finishing the story she started. Second call. 5:38 a.m. Daniel Ortiz, Chief Operating Officer of Callaway Heritage Estates for the past 12 years. The man who turned my hand-scrawled property notes into a management system that tracked 212 properties with military precision. Daniel answered with the alertness of someone who had been awake for an hour already. He ran the operations from a home office in Healdsburg, starting every day at 4:30 reviewing occupancy reports and maintenance requests. Daniel, I need you to initiate the Hargrove transaction. 3 properties. The Telegraph Hill penthouse, the Vine Street commercial unit in Street Helena, and the Oak Glen rental compound in Calistoga. Daniel was quiet for 2 seconds. That's $11.8 million in assets, Hank. The penthouse alone appraises at 4.2. I know what they're worth. Contact Hargrove Wine Group directly. They've been trying to acquire premium Napa properties for 3 years. Tell them full asking price, cash only. 24-hour close. No contingencies. Hargrove is Drake's biggest competitor. I know. Another pause. Daniel was not a man who asked unnecessary questions. He understood that when I gave an order at 5:30 in the morning, the reasons would reveal themselves in time. I'll have preliminary agreements drafted by noon. If Hargrove accepts terms, we can execute by tomorrow morning. Make it happen, Daniel. Third call was not a phone call. It was a walk. I left the cellar and crossed the property in the pre-dawn gray to the small cottage near the fermentation barn where Rosa Alvarez had lived for 25 years. Rosa was my vineyard manager, the woman who knew every vine on the property by its age, its yield history, and its temperament. She'd started working for me when Megan was 4 years old. She'd watched my daughter grow up among the grapes and then watched her grow away from them. Rosa was already on her porch with coffee, the way she was every morning at 5:45. She saw my face and set down her cup. What's wrong, Hank? Harvest is coming early this year, Rosa. She looked at me carefully. Rosa had known me long enough to hear what I wasn't saying. We're not talking about grapes, are we? We're talking about everything. I told her what was coming. Not the details, just the shape of it. That Saturday's wine auction would be different. That things would change. That the vineyard itself was safe, but the world around it was about to shift. Rosa nodded slowly. She looked out at the vine rows disappearing into the morning mist. What about Megan? That's why I'm doing this. Rosa picked up her coffee again. Then let's make sure the vines are ready. Whatever happens to the people, the grapes still need picking. I walked back to the cellar. The sun was just touching the highest ridge now, and the first light caught the dew on the vine leaves like scattered diamonds. My phone buzzed. An email. From Margaret. Subject line. Urgent. Yountville Discovery. Additional documentation. I opened it. Attached were scanned copies of Julian's personal loan agreement with Apex Financial Services. The collateral schedule. Casino transaction records from the Bellagio showing 17 visits over 9 months. Individual losses, ranging from $40,000 to $380,000 per session. 17 visits, 9 months, $2.3 million gone. I looked at the photograph on my wall. Megan, at 5 years old, barefoot between the vine rows, laughing with her arms stretched wide like the whole vineyard was her playground. Her hair was wild, and her feet were dirty, and she didn't care about designer boots or penthouse apartments or men who gambled away houses they'd promised her. That little girl was still in there somewhere, buried under years of entitlement and assumption, and 550,000 strangers telling her she deserved things she hadn't earned. I wasn't punishing my daughter. I was digging her out. I hit forward on Margaret's email. Added one line in the body. Add to wine auction file. All documents. Large format. And then I turned off the phone, walked upstairs, and went out to check the vines. The sugar levels wouldn't measure themselves. 42 people gathered under strings of fairy lights woven through the pergola of a vineyard restaurant in Yountville on a Thursday evening. The air smelled like late summer jasmine and expensive perfume. Waiters in black vests poured $300 bottles of wine into crystal glasses that caught the candlelight like liquid gold. A string quartet played something classical in the corner that nobody was actually listening to. This was the engagement party. Julian and Megan's official announcement to their world that two dynasties were becoming one. Or at least, that's what it looked like on Instagram. I arrived at 7:15. Same rubber boots. Same Carhartt jacket. Same $4 bottle of wine I'd made myself with no label. Just a handwritten tag. I'd considered wearing something nicer for about 30 seconds that afternoon, then decided that a man who had built $130 million worth of vineyard empire while wearing these boots wasn't going to change his uniform for people who measured worth by thread count. Megan intercepted me at the entrance before I'd taken 3 steps. She was wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill and shoes so thin they looked like they'd snap on a pebble. Her smile was wide, and her eyes were panicked. "Dad!" She gripped my arm and steered me sideways like a tugboat redirecting a barge. "You made it. Wouldn't miss it." Her eyes dropped to my boots. "Dad, I told you to dress up. Julian's partners are here. His mother's friends from the Sonoma Arts Council are here. There are people here who matter. People who matter. As opposed to me. You know what I mean." She took the wine bottle from my hand, glanced at the handwritten tag, and passed it to a waiter with a tight smile. "We'll save this for later." She said it the way you'd say, "We'll recycle this eventually." Julian appeared at her shoulder. Freshly tailored charcoal suit, gold cufflinks, a watch that caught the fairy light and threw tiny sparks across his wrist. He extended his hand to me with the warmth of a man closing a business deal. "Hank, wonderful to see you. Really glad you could make it. Wonderful to see you too, Julian. Congratulations on the engagement." "Thank you." Julian leaned in slightly. "We're making the formal announcement at 9. Megan's been planning the social media rollout all week. Should get great engagement." Great engagement. For the engagement. The man was thinking about click-through rates at his own proposal celebration. Catherine Drake materialized beside us like she'd been summoned by the sound of poor people talking. She wore a cream silk blouse, pearl earrings, and an expression that suggested she could smell my $4 wine from across the terrace. "Hank." She kissed the air near my cheek. "So glad you could join us. You must be so proud of Megan. She's really blossomed since meeting Julian." Blossomed. Like my daughter was a houseplant that had finally been given proper sunlight. "I'm always proud of Megan," I said. Catherine tilted her head. "Of course you are. And how are you managing? The vineyard must be quite a burden at your stage." "My stage." She meant my age, my apparent income, my rubber boots, my place in her mental filing system, somewhere between charity case and background character. "The vineyard keeps me busy," I said. "That's all I need." Richard Drake arrived at the conversation with a glass of his own wine and the confident stride of a man who didn't know I'd read his bank statements. He clapped my shoulder like we were old fraternity brothers. "Hank, enjoying the evening? Beautiful setting, isn't it?" Julian chose this venue specifically because of the vineyard backdrop. "Felt it honored your contribution to Megan's upbringing." My contribution to Megan's upbringing. Like I donated a used couch to a furniture drive. Lovely spot, I agreed. The evening unfolded exactly as I expected. Julian gave a speech about legacy and partnership and building something greater than any one family. Richard nodded along like a conductor watching his orchestra perform. Megan photographed everything, every plate, every glass, every floral arrangement. She posted Instagram stories every 10 minutes, with captions that made my chest tighten. 7:15. Our vineyard glows tonight. Hashtag blessed. 7:32. Building an empire with my soulmate. Hashtag Drake Calloway. 7:48. Our future home in Yountville. Hashtag roots. Hashtag legacy. Our vineyard. Our empire. Our future home. Everything mine had become hers in a caption, and 500,000 people double-tapped their approval. At 9 o'clock, Julian stood and raised his glass. The string quartet stopped. 42 faces turned toward him in the fairy light. To building something greater than any one family can build alone, he said. His voice was polished, rehearsed, perfect. To merging the best of Drake and Calloway, to honoring the land that Hank has cared for, and transforming it into something that will endure for generations. Richard raised his glass. Catherine raised hers. Megan wiped a tear from her eye and raised hers. 42 people toasted the future of my land, without my permission. I raised my glass too. The $4 wine the waiter had quietly poured for me at my request, while everyone else drank the $300 Drake Reserve. I sipped it slowly. It was better than anything on that table, and nobody in the room would ever know. At 10:15, as guests began filtering toward the valet stand, Julian caught my arm in the parking lot. The fairy lights were behind him now, making his silhouette look taller than he was. Hank, I need those land transfer papers signed before Saturday. His voice had dropped the party charm. This was the real Julian. Clipped. Urgent. A man on a deadline he hadn't told anyone about. My father's investors are expecting an announcement at the wine auction. The Drake Calloway partnership. It needs to be official by then. What kind of announcement? The kind that changes everything for both our families. I looked at him for a long moment. His jaw was tight. His eyes held the particular strain of a man carrying secrets he couldn't afford to drop. You're right, I said. Saturday will change everything. Julian smiled. The relieved smile of a man who thinks he's won. Great. I'll have the papers couriered to you tomorrow morning. I climbed into my Dodge Ram. The engine coughed its familiar cough. Through the windshield, I could see the fairy lights being dismantled, the waiters clearing crystal glasses, the last guests climbing into cars that cost more than houses. He dialed Margaret Chen. Everything ready for Saturday? Ironclad, Hank. Every single document, physical and digital, formatted for the main screen at Meadowood. Good. Because on Saturday, 200 people are going to learn what man of the soil really means. Meadowood Resort sits on 250 acres of forested hillside in Street Helena, tucked behind stone walls and a canopy of old-growth oaks that filter the sunlight into something that feels like money. The Napa Valley Wine Auction has been held here for decades. It is where the powerful people of wine country come to see and be seen, where bottles sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars and handshake deals reshape the industry over glasses of Pinot Noir. On Saturday evening, 200 people filled the grand hall. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, the scent of expensive wine, and more expensive cologne. Every significant name in California wine was represented. Winemakers, distributors, investors, journalists from Wine Spectator, Bloomberg, and the Wall Street Journal. 3 television cameras from local affiliates covering the event for the weekend news. I arrived at 6:55. Rubber boots, Carhartt jacket, dirt under my fingernails from that morning's vine inspection. I'd checked the Cabernet block at dawn, the way I did every morning, because the sugar levels were approaching harvest threshold, and the grapes didn't care that tonight their owner was about to set fire to the most prestigious wine event in the country. The hostess at the entrance looked at my boots, then at her guest list, then back at my boots. She smiled the uncertain smile of someone trying to decide whether I was a lost groundskeeper or an eccentric billionaire. In Napa Valley, both were possible. "Callaway," I said. "Table 14. She found my name and her smile relaxed. "Of course, Mr. Callaway. Right this way." Table 14 was in the back row, the farthest table from the stage. I'd requested it specifically when I made the reservation. I wanted distance. I wanted to watch before I moved. The stage was set up at the far end of the hall. A large projection screen behind the podium displayed the Napa Valley Wine Auction logo. In 30 minutes, that screen would show something very different. At 7:20, Julian Drake III walked to the podium. He wore a Tom Ford suit that probably cost $5,000. His hair was perfect. His smile was perfect. His posture radiated the particular confidence of a man who believed he was about to close the biggest deal of his life. Behind him, the screen changed. A new logo faded in. Elegant gold lettering on a deep burgundy background. Drake Callaway. Strategic Partnership. The Future of Napa Valley. I looked at that screen and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger. Something quieter. The focused stillness that comes right before a harvest, when the fruit is ready and the only thing left to do is cut. Julian cleared his throat into the microphone. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for what I believe will be a landmark moment in Napa Valley's history." He clicked to the next slide. Aerial photographs of my vineyard appeared on screen. My vine rows. My hillsides. My land. All of it overlaid with architectural renderings of a luxury retreat center, complete with meditation pavilions, a helipad, and a spa where my oldest Cabernet block currently stood. The Callaway property, Julian continued, represents 3,200 acres of the finest terroir in North America. For 35 years, Hank Callaway has been a dedicated steward of this land. His voice dipped into the practiced sincerity of a man reading a eulogy for someone who wasn't dead yet. Tonight, we're honored to announce that the Drake and Callaway families are joining forces to transform this extraordinary property into a world-class destination. Richard Drake stood from his front row seat and turned to face the room. He'd rehearsed this moment. I could see it in the way his chin lifted and his hands clasped behind his back like a general addressing troops. "Hank Callaway is a wonderful steward of the land," Richard said. "We're honored that he's entrusting his legacy to the Drake family. This partnership will preserve the spirit of the Callaway vineyard while unlocking its full potential." Entrusting his legacy. Unlocking its full potential. They were eulogizing my life's work to a room full of people who assumed the farmer in the back row had agreed to all of it. Megan sat at the front table beside Catherine Drake. She was filming the entire presentation on her phone, broadcasting it live to her Instagram followers. I could see the viewer count climbing on her screen from where I sat. 15,000 people watching my daughter celebrate the theft of my land in real time. Her phone buzzed. A text from Leah Kim. I couldn't read it from this distance, but I would learn later what it said. "Meg, did your dad actually agree to this? This seems really fast." Megan's reply, which Leah would show me weeks later, was 3 words. "He doesn't have a choice. He doesn't have a choice." My daughter believed I was a man without options. Julian was wrapping up his presentation. And so, in the spirit of family, legacy, and the extraordinary land that connects us, I'd like to invite the man of the hour to join me on stage. Hank Callaway, Megan's father, and the heart of this partnership. 200 heads turned toward table 14. Toward the man in the muddy boots sitting alone in the back row with a glass of water because he hadn't ordered wine. I stood up slowly. The walk from table 14 to the stage took approximately 45 seconds. I counted my steps, 37. Each one on polished hardwood that reflected the chandelier light like a frozen lake. The room was silent except for polite applause that faded as people got a closer look at my boots. Julian extended his hand as I reached the podium. His grip was firm. His smile was wide. His eyes held the particular relief of a man who thought the hardest part was over. I didn't shake his hand. I stepped past him to the microphone. "Thank you, Julian. That was a very impressive presentation." Julian's smile held. The room waited. "But before we talk about partnerships, I think everyone here deserves to know exactly what they're investing in." The smile flickered. Just for a moment. Like a candle in a draft. I pulled out my phone and dialed Margaret Chen. She answered before the first ring finished. I put her on speaker and held the phone up to the microphone. Her voice filled the hall, clear and precise as a surgical instrument. "Margaret, I need you to walk everyone through some documents." The back door of the hall opened. Margaret Chen walked in carrying a leather portfolio thick enough to stop a bullet. She wore a black suit and an expression that said someone in this room was about to have a very bad evening. "Which documents, Hank?" I looked at Julian. His smile was gone. I looked at Richard. His face was the color of old paper. I looked at Megan. Her phone still broadcasting to 15,000 people. Her eyes wide with the first flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. "Fear." "All of them," I said. Margaret Chen walked to the front of the hall like a woman who had done this 1,000 times. She hadn't. But she moved with the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly what was inside her portfolio and exactly what it would do to every person in this room. She set the leather case on the podium beside me, unzipped it, and removed the first folder. It was labeled Callaway Heritage Estates, Corporate Overview. She handed it to me and stepped to the side of the stage where a technician was waiting. She'd coordinated with Meadowood's AV team that afternoon. The main screen, the one that had been displaying Julian's architectural renderings of helipads and meditation pavilions 10 minutes ago, now showed a blue loading bar. Julian stood 3 feet to my left. He hadn't moved from the stage. His face held the expression of a man watching a car accident develop in slow motion and realizing he was in the car. I opened the folder and looked out at 200 faces. Julian's presentation was very thorough, I said. Beautiful renderings. Impressive projections. But there are a few details he left out. Probably because he doesn't know them. So let me fill in the gaps. The screen behind me loaded. The Callaway Heritage Estates logo appeared. Not the handwritten tag on a $4 wine bottle. A proper corporate identity. Elegant. Professional. The kind of logo that belongs on the side of a building, not on a farmer's homemade wine. My name is Henry Callaway. Most of you know me as Hank. Some of you know me as Megan's father. A few of you, and I looked directly at Catherine Drake, know me as a simple farmer, very salt of the earth. Catherine's smile vanished. Margaret, would you walk everyone through the first document? Margaret stepped forward. Her voice carried through the hall speakers with surgical clarity. Callaway Heritage Estates was incorporated in 1994 in the state of California. It began as a single 12-acre vineyard purchased in 1991 for $35,000. She clicked to the next slide. Over the past 3 decades, Callaway Heritage has grown into one of the largest privately held vineyard and property management companies on the West Coast. The screen filled with numbers. I watched 200 faces process them in real time. Current holdings: 3,200 acres of premium vineyard land across Napa Valley, Sonoma County, and the Central Coast of California. 12 operational wineries producing award-winning wines exported to 28 countries. 45 luxury vacation rental properties with an average occupancy rate of 89%. Total employees across all operations: 412. The room was very quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when 200 people simultaneously realize they've been wrong about something fundamental. Megan's voice cut through the silence from the front row. Her phone was still broadcasting. 15,000 people watching through a screen. That's not possible. I looked at my daughter. Which part, Megan? She stared at me. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Julian, who was staring at the screen like it was written in a language he'd never studied. She looked at Richard, who had gone the particular shade of gray that expensive tans turn when the blood drains from behind them. All of it, she whispered. Margaret, I said. Next document, please. Margaret clicked forward. The screen changed to a financial summary page. At the top, in bold lettering, Callaway Heritage Estates. Portfolio Valuation Summary, Current Fiscal Year. Total Portfolio Valuation. $130 million, Margaret read. Annual Gross Revenue. $24.6 million. Net Operating Income. $14.2 million. Current day revenue as of this morning. $67,412. She clicked again. A dashboard appeared on the screen. The same dashboard I checked every morning behind the iron door. Real-time numbers. Live. Updating as 200 people watched. Occupancy rates blinking green across a map of 15 states. Revenue tickers climbing by the minute. A property list that scrolled for 11 pages. Today's gross revenue. $67,412. I repeated. This week. 412,000. This month will close at approximately 1.7 million. I let that settle. Then I pulled 2 magazines from the folder and held them up. Wine Spectator, October 2023. Cover story. The Ghost Vintner. The $100 million man. Nobody knows. I held up the second one. Forbes. March 2021. Page 67. The Invisible Vintner. How a Carpenter Built $100 million wine empire without anyone noticing. I set both magazines on the podium. Wall Street Journal profiled me in 2022. Bloomberg did a segment last year. Each article used the same phrase. The Ghost Vintner. The man who owns more premium vineyard land than any individual in California but lives like he's still a 26-year-old carpenter. Catherine Drake's hand found the edge of the table in front of her. Oh my God, she said. Not loudly. But in a room this quiet, a whisper sounds like a shout. Margaret, I said. Document 3, please. Margaret opened the next folder. The screen changed again. A property ownership map appeared. Red dots marking every Callaway Heritage property in Napa Valley. There were dozens. They covered the map like a rash. Among the properties owned by Callaway Heritage Estates, Margaret read, her voice steady as a metronome. Unit 12A. Telegraph Hill. San Francisco. A penthouse apartment. Current tenant. Megan Callaway. Monthly rent. $8,500. Paid via internal transfer from the Callaway Heritage operating account. Megan's face went white. Additionally, Callaway Heritage owns the restaurant property at 1422 Vine Street in Yountville, where Julian Drake III proposed to Megan Callaway on March 15th of this year. Julian made a sound. Not quite a word. Something between a cough and a gasp. And finally, Margaret continued. Callaway Heritage Estates holds ownership of 3 commercial vineyard parcels currently leased to Drake Vineyards for grape production. These parcels account for approximately 31% of Drake's current annual grape supply. She paused and looked at me. I looked at the room. Every glass of wine you've been drinking tonight, I said, came from grapes grown on my land. The silence was absolute. 200 people breathing as quietly as they could. Megan's phone, still broadcasting to what I would later learn, was now 28,000 viewers. Julian frozen on stage, like a man who had just realized the floor beneath him was made of glass. Richard Drake stood up from his front row seat. His chair scraped against the floor, and the sound cut through the room like a knife on porcelain. This is absurd, he said. His voice was loud, but his hands were shaking. Hank, whatever game you're playing, this has gone far enough. These documents could be fabricated. Anyone can print a fake magazine cover. Margaret didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Mr. Drake, I'd recommend you sit down. She reached into the portfolio and removed 2 more folders. One was red, One was black. Because the next two documents concern your family directly. And I don't think you want to be standing when you hear them. Richard looked at the folders. He looked at Margaret. He looked at me. Then he sat down. The room held its breath. 200 people watching a man in a $5,000 suit sit down because a woman in a black suit told him to. Megan's phone was still broadcasting. The viewer count had climbed past 35,000. Comments were scrolling faster than anyone could read. Margaret picked up the red folder. She held it the way a surgeon holds a scalpel, with precision and zero sentiment. Document 4, she said. Drake Vineyards. Consolidated Financial Summary, filed with the Napa County Assessor's Office and available as public record following the filing of lien notices on August 14th of this year. Richard Drake's voice cracked across the room. That information is confidential. You have no right to present private financial data in a public forum. Margaret didn't blink. Mr. Drake, lien notices become public record upon filing. Your own attorneys at Drake and Associates would confirm this. In fact, I contacted your firm yesterday to verify the filing dates. Your paralegal was very helpful. Richard opened his mouth. No sound came out. Margaret clicked the screen. Numbers appeared. Clean, stark, inescapable. Drake Vineyards. Outstanding consolidated debt, $80 million. She let the number sit in the air for 3 full seconds. Current season grape production, 60% below projected yield due to extended drought conditions across primary Sonoma and Carneros parcels. Lender status with First Pacific Lending. Under active review for potential covenant breach, with default proceedings anticipated within 90 days if production shortfalls are not remedied. The room shifted. I could feel it. Not a sound, exactly. More like the collective adjustment of 200 people recalculating everything they thought they knew about the Drake family. Investors who had been nodding along to Julian's partnership presentation 10 minutes ago were now looking at Richard the way you look at a crack in a foundation. Julian stood frozen on the stage beside me. The color had drained from his face so completely, he looked like a photograph of himself. His mouth moved slightly, forming words that never made it past his lips. Megan's voice came from the front row, small and confused. 80 million? Julian, what is she talking about? Julian didn't look at her. He was staring at the red folder like it was a loaded weapon pointed at his chest. Julian. Megan repeated. Your family is $80 million in debt? Julian's voice came out thin and stretched. Megan, it's complicated. The drought was unexpected. We have restructuring plans. My father has been managing the situation. I looked at Richard, who was gripping the edge of his table with both hands. The man who had told my daughter I was too poor to maintain a vineyard was $80 million underwater and sinking. Margaret set down the red folder. She picked up the black one. The black folder was thinner than the red one. It didn't need to be thick. Some truths don't require many pages. Document 5, Margaret said. Her voice hadn't changed pitch once. Personal financial disclosure. Julian Drake, III. Separate from Drake. Vineyards, corporate obligations. Julian's head snapped toward Margaret. Wait. That's private. That has nothing to do with the business. It has everything to do with this room, Margaret said. Because it involves a property that was presented to this audience as part of the Drake-Callaway partnership. She clicked the screen. A property deed appeared. The Yountville Estate. 16 acres. The house Julian had shown Megan 3 months ago. The house where their roots would grow. The Yountville property, Margaret read, is titled to Julian Drake III. However, a secondary lien was filed against this property on April 2nd of this year by Apex Financial Services, a debt collection intermediary. Julian stepped toward Margaret. Stop. You need to stop right now. I put my hand on his arm. Gently. The way you'd stop a child from touching a stove. Julian. Let her finish. Margaret continued. Apex Financial Services represents consolidated personal debts owed to the Bellagio Resort and Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada. Total outstanding balance, $2.3 million. The room made a sound. Not a gasp, exactly. Something deeper. The sound of 200 people understanding something terrible at the same moment. Margaret clicked again. The screen filled with a table. Transaction records. Dates. Amounts. Locations. 17 entries, spanning 9 months. 17 documented visits to the Bellagio, Margaret said. Individual session losses ranging from $40,000 to $380,000 per visit. Total losses, $2.3 million. Mr. Drake secured this personal debt using the Yountville property as collateral, despite that property already being pledged as part of the Drake Vineyards corporate loan package with First Pacific Lending. She paused, looked at Julian. In other words, the property was double-pledged. The house that Julian Drake promised to Megan Calloway as their future home is collateral for both a corporate loan in default and a personal gambling debt. Julian's composure shattered. Megan, I can explain. It was a temporary situation. I was under pressure. The business was failing, and I needed to clear my head, and it got out of control, but I was going to fix it before the wedding. I had a plan. Megan stood up from her seat. Her phone was still in her hand. Still broadcasting. 47,000 viewers now. Her face had gone past white into something translucent, like paper held up to light. You gambled away our home? It wasn't like that. Julian's voice was cracking. I was going to pay it back. My father was going to help restructure the debt. Your father is $80 million in debt, Julian. She was shouting now. The room didn't pretend not to listen. There was no pretending anymore. You took our future house, and you used it to pay for blackjack? 17 times? $380,000 in one night? Megan, please. It was a mistake. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is burning dinner. You lost $2.3 million at a casino, and you mortgaged the house you promised me to cover it. Megan looked at Julian. She looked at Richard, who was staring at the table. She looked at Catherine, who had pressed both hands over her mouth. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were wet and wild and broken open. Everyone in this room has been lying to me, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silence of that hall, every person heard it. My fiancé. His family. She paused. And apparently even my own father. I held her gaze. I never lied to you, Megan. I just stopped correcting your assumptions. Megan stared at me for 3 heartbeats. Then she turned and walked toward the exit. Not running. Walking. The steady, deliberate walk of a person who has just realized that the ground beneath every part of her life is not what she thought it was. Julian started after her. Megan. Wait. Please. We can talk about this. She didn't turn around. She pushed through the double doors and disappeared into the meadowwood night. Julian followed. The doors swung shut behind them. Richard Drake sat motionless in his chair. Catherine had tears running silently down her cheeks. 200 people sat in the kind of silence that only happens when something irreversible has occurred. I stood alone on the stage. The screen behind me still showed the casino transaction records. 17 lines. 9 months. $2.3 million of my daughter's future. Gambled away by a man who wore $5,000 suits and called me a farmer. Margaret appeared at my elbow. Her voice was low. Hank. Megan's Instagram Live is still running. Her phone is still broadcasting from the front table. I looked at Megan's empty seat. Her phone lay face up on the white tablecloth, camera pointing at the ceiling. 47,000 people watching a chandelier and listening to the loudest silence in Napa Valley. I know, I said. I learned what happened next from the recording. 72,000 people saw it live. Millions more would watch the clips in the days that followed. But I wasn't there for it. I was standing on a stage in front of 200 silent people, holding a $4 bottle of wine, watching the doors my daughter had walked through settle back into their frames. Megan made it to the parking lot before she stopped. Later, she told me she'd intended to drive away. Just get in the Porsche and go. But her keys were in her purse. And her purse was on the table next to her phone. She'd left everything behind except her fiancé's phone, which Julian had handed her earlier that evening to take photos of the venue. She sat in the passenger seat of the Porsche Cayenne with Julian's phone and did what her generation does when the world collapses. She opened Instagram and went live. The stream started at 9:47 p.m. The screen showed Megan's face illuminated by the phone's glow against the dark interior of the car. Her mascara was running. Her hair, which had been professionally styled that morning, was falling loose around her face. Behind her, through the windshield, the Meadowood parking lot lights cast orange pools across the asphalt. The viewer count appeared in the corner. 14,000. People who'd been watching her earlier stream from the front table, refreshing and waiting to see what happened next. She didn't speak for the first 12 seconds. Just sat there, breathing, staring into the camera, like she was trying to decide whether to scream or disappear. Then she started. I don't know where to begin. Her voice was raw, stripped of the podcast polish, the living elevated confidence, the curated ease she'd spent 5 years building for an audience. I'm sitting in a parking lot at the Napa Valley Wine Auction, and my entire life just fell apart in front of 200 people. The viewer count ticked up. 19,000. 23,000. My dad. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. My dad, who I've been calling a dirt-poor farmer for the past year. On my podcast. My dad, who I tried to take land from because I thought he was too old and too broke to use it properly. My dad is worth $130 million. 29,000 viewers. He owns 3,200 acres of vineyard, 12 wineries, 45 rental properties. He's been in Wine Spectator, Forbes, The Wall Street Journal. They call him the Ghost Vintner. And I called him an embarrassment. The comments were moving too fast to read. Clips of this would surface within the hour on TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, but in that moment, it was just Megan and a phone and a growing audience that couldn't look away, and Julian. She laughed. The kind of laugh that sounds like glass breaking. Julian, my fiancé, the man I chose over my father. His family is $80 million in debt. Their vineyard is failing. The bank is about to foreclose. And he, Julian, the man who gave me a $45,000 engagement ring and promised me a house in Yountville, gambled away that house at the Bellagio. $2.3 million, 17 trips to Las Vegas in 9 months, and he used our future home to cover his losses. 38,000 viewers. He mortgaged our house twice. Once for his family's failing business, and once for blackjack. And I didn't know. I didn't know about any of it, because I never asked. I never asked about his finances. I never asked about my dad's finances. I never asked about anything that wasn't about me. The car door opened. Julian appeared in the frame, bending down to look inside. His suit jacket was gone. His tie was loose. He looked like a man who had just run across a parking lot and arrived too late. Megan, turn off the camera. Why? So you can lie to me without witnesses? Julian glanced at the phone screen and saw the viewer count. 41,000. His face changed. The desperation in his eyes shifted into something colder. Calculation. The instinct of a man weighing exposure against damage control. Megan, this isn't the time. We need to talk privately. Privately. Like when you privately gambled away $2.3 million? Like when your father privately told you to use me to get my dad's land? Julian went still. What are you talking about? Use the girl. She trusts you. That's what your father wrote to you in an email 3 weeks ago. My dad read it to 200 people tonight. Did you miss that part while you were busy explaining 17 trips to Las Vegas? Julian's mouth opened. The silence lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds of 44,000 people watching a man decide whether to lie or tell the truth. He chose something in between. Megan, I did love you. I do love you. The land was just. He stopped. Searched for a word. A bonus. A bonus. The word landed in the car like a stone dropped into still water. 48,000 viewers. My father's land was a bonus, Megan repeated. Our relationship was real. But stealing my dad's 3,200-acre vineyard was just a nice little extra. I didn't say it like that. You didn't have to. Your father said it for you. Use the girl. Julian stepped back from the car. He crossed his arms. The defensive posture of a man who had run out of explanations and was switching to self-preservation. 53,000. Megan looked into the camera. Her tears had stopped. What replaced them was something worse. Clarity. I spent the last year telling 550,000 people that my father was holding me back. I recorded a podcast episode called When Your Family Holds You Back. And I called my dad a glorified farmer who got lucky. I posted Instagram stories from his vineyard with captions about pulling up old vines to make room for growth. And the whole time, the man who was actually holding me back was sitting next to me in a Porsche paid for by a family that was $80 million underwater. 61,000 viewers. She paused, looked down at her hands. When she looked up again, her voice was quiet and steady. If you're watching this, Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And I know that doesn't fix anything. I know words don't rebuild what I tore down, but I want you to know that I finally understand the difference. She swallowed. I chose a man who wanted your dirt over a father who wanted to give me roots. 72,000 people heard that sentence. It would be screenshotted, shared, tattooed, printed on coffee mugs by strangers who had never met my daughter but recognized the truth in what she said. Megan ended the stream. The screen went black. Julian was standing outside the car, arms still crossed, watching through the window. He knocked on the glass. Megan, open the door. We need to figure this out. She didn't open the door. She climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine with Julian's spare key from the center console, and pulled out of the parking space. Julian jumped back. She didn't look at him. The Porsche's taillights moved down the long Meadowood driveway, turned left onto the dark road, and disappeared into the Napa Valley night. She didn't drive toward San Francisco. She didn't drive toward the vineyard. She drove west, toward the coast, toward somewhere that wasn't part of the life she just watched burn down in front of 72,000 strangers. I wouldn't hear from her until sunrise. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the deck with a cup of coffee that went cold in my hands and watched the stars move over the vineyard. The vines were silhouettes against the dark hillside. Row after row of living things that had survived droughts and freezes and wildfires and still produced fruit every autumn without being asked. There's a lesson in that. I'd spent 35 years learning it. My daughter hadn't started yet. At 5:47 a.m., with the first gray light bleeding over the eastern ridge and fog sitting low in the valley, like something waiting to be burned off, my phone buzzed. Daniel Ortiz. Tom, it's done. All 3 properties sold. Wire transfers confirmed 23 minutes ago. I put him on speaker. His voice filled the quiet morning air. Hargrove Wine Group. Total acquisition, $11.8 million. Cash deal, no contingencies, 18-hour close. The penthouse at Telegraph Hill appraised at 4.2, sold at 4.2. The Vine Street commercial unit in Street Helena sold at 3.1. The Oak Glen rental compound in Calistoga sold at 4.5. Hargrove's attorneys are filing transfer documents with the county this morning. I sipped my cold coffee. And the tenant notifications? Standard 60-day relocation notices will be served to all current tenants by end of business today, including Unit 12A at Telegraph Hill, including my daughter's penthouse. The apartment she believed she'd earned through her own success. The one she'd decorated with brand partnership furniture and photographed for 550,000 followers as proof of her elevated life. Thank you, Daniel. Hank. Daniel paused. One more thing. Hargrove's CEO asked me to pass along a message. He said he's been trying to acquire those properties for 4 years, and he wanted you to know he considers this the deal of the decade. Also said, and I'm quoting, "Please tell Mr. Calloway that I've never done 11.8 million in 18 hours before, and I'd like to buy him a steak. Tell him I prefer burritos." I hung up and opened my banking app. The Calloway Heritage Estates operating account showed the wire deposits. Clean. Final. Irreversible. Then I opened a different screen, the automated transfer schedule that had been running every month for 8 years. Megan Calloway. Monthly transfer, $13,000. Rent subsidy, $8,500. Living expenses, $2,500. Discretionary, $2,000. I did the math one more time, even though I already knew the number. 8 years. 96 months. $13,000 per month. $1,248,000. I pressed cancel on every line item. Effective immediately. The screen asked for confirmation. I confirmed. At 6:22. My phone rang. Julian Drake III. I let it ring 4 times before answering. His voice was a mix of fury and panic, the sound of a man who had woken up to discover that the ground beneath his empire had been sold out from under him while he slept. "You sold to Hargrove? Do you have any idea what you've done? Hargrove is our biggest competitor. My father has been trying to block their expansion into premium Napa properties for a decade. You just handed them $11.8 million of prime real estate on a silver platter." I watched a hawk circle over the vineyard. The fog was starting to thin, and the first sunlight was catching the dew on the highest vine leaves like scattered glass. "Julian." They offered full asking price. Cash. 18-hour close. Business is business. This isn't business. This is revenge. This is a man selling his own property to a willing buyer at market value. If that feels like revenge, maybe you should examine why. Julian's breathing was heavy on the line. "You're going to regret this, Hank. My father has connections, legal resources. We'll find a way to unwind these sales." Julian. I kept my voice level. "Your father's firm occupies the 3rd floor of a building that, until 18 hours ago, was owned by Calloway Heritage Estates. Hargrove now holds that lease. Your father's biggest competitor is now his landlord. I'd suggest focusing your legal resources on explaining that to your investors instead of threatening me." Silence. Then the line went dead. At 6:39, Megan called. Her voice sounded like it had been dragged across gravel. She'd been crying all night. Behind her, I could hear waves. "Dad? Where are you, Megan?" Point Reyes. I drove to the coast. I slept in the car. Point Reyes. 90 minutes west of Napa. A stretch of wind-swept coastline where the fog rolls in, thick enough to erase the horizon. My daughter had driven to the edge of the continent and stopped. "Dad, Julian just broke up with me." "I know." He sent a text message. Not a phone call, not a conversation. A text. She read it to me, her voice shaking. "Megan, given the events of last night and the impact on my family's business reputation, I think it's best if we take a permanent step back. I wish you well. Please return the engagement ring at your earliest convenience." A permanent step back. I wish you well. The man had proposed with a $45,000 ring and ended it with a text message that sounded like a corporate press release. "I'm sorry, Megan. Are you? I'm sorry you're hurting." "I'm not sorry he's gone." Megan was quiet for a moment. Then, "Dad, what happens now? With the apartment? With everything?" "The apartment was sold this morning. Hargrove Wine Group. You have 60 days to relocate." Her voice got smaller. And the money? The monthly transfers? Stopped. This morning. Effective immediately. Dad, I don't have any savings. You've been paying for everything. Everything. I know. A long silence. Waves in the background. Seabirds. How much do I have in my bank account? Check. I heard the sound of fingers on a screen. The banking app loading. A pause that lasted exactly 5 seconds. $412. Another silence. Longer this time. Dad, what am I supposed to do with $412? I looked out at my vineyard. The fog was lifting. The vines were emerging, row by row, heavy with fruit that had spent an entire season building itself from nothing but sunlight and stubborn soil. You're supposed to learn, Megan. You're supposed to figure out what your life looks like when nobody else is paying for it. Her breathing hitched. Then, very quietly, she said okay, and hung up. I set down my phone. The sun was fully up now, warming the back of my neck, turning the dew into tiny prisms of light across 3,200 acres of land that my daughter had called just dirt. Harvest started next week. The grapes were ready. Whether the people were ready was a different question entirely. News in Napa Valley travels the way wildfire does. It starts as a spark in one conversation, catches in another, and by the time anyone thinks to contain it, the whole valley is burning with it. By noon on Sunday, every winery, every tasting room, every vineyard worker and sommelier and restaurant host within 50 miles knew what had happened at Meadowood. The ghost vintner had revealed himself. The Drake empire was drowning, and the influencer who had tried to steal her father's land was trending on every platform that existed. Wine Spectator published first. Their weekend editor had been at the auction. The headline went up at 11:15 a.m. The ghost vintner revealed. Hank Calloway unmasks. $100 million empire at Napa Wine Auction. The article was 3,000 words long and included photographs someone had taken on their phone of Margaret Chen presenting documents on the Meadowood stage, while Julian Drake stood frozen beside her. CNN picked it up by 2 o'clock. Napa Valley's hidden billionaire exposes daughter's land grab in dramatic wine auction confrontation. They ran it as a segment on the evening news with a panel of financial analysts discussing the implications for Drake Vineyards. The New York Post went with their usual subtlety. Influencer tried to steal Dad's vineyard. He owned 3,200 acres and her apartment too. That one got 4 million views in 24 hours. Fox Business did a segment titled, "When Family Wealth Goes Underground." CNBC followed with "The Stealth Billionaires Among Us: Why Some of America's Richest Choose to Live Poor." A real estate podcast I'd never heard of devoted an entire episode to what they called the most spectacular property power move in California history. But it was the social media explosion that truly measured the scale of what had happened. Megan's Instagram live stream from the Meadowood parking lot had been screen recorded by thousands of viewers. Within 12 hours, the clips had been cut, captioned, and distributed across every platform. TikTok was the worst, or the best, depending on your perspective. Someone had edited the moment Megan said, "I chose a man who wanted your dirt over a father who wanted to give me roots," into a 15-second clip with dramatic music underneath. It had 11 million views by Monday morning. The comments ran into the hundreds of thousands. "Your dad is a legend. This is what entitlement looks like. The dirt line is the hardest thing I've ever heard. Girl, your dad was right there the whole time and you never saw him." Another creator had spliced Julian's. The land was just a bonus into a compilation of what they titled, "The Worst Things Men Have Said Out Loud." It had 7 million views and was climbing. Megan's follower count was hemorrhaging. 550,000 on Saturday evening, 480,000 by Sunday morning, 420,000 by Monday night. Every hour, the number ticked down like a clock running backward. Each lost follower was a person who had decided that the woman they'd been watching live her elevated life was not who they thought she was. The brand partnerships collapsed in sequence, like dominoes falling in a line. Goop sent an email at 9 a.m. Monday. We regret to inform you that your partnership with Goop has been terminated effective immediately due to a fundamental misalignment with our brand values. Athletic Greens followed at 11, Ritual at 1:30, a skincare company called Lumino at 3, Daniel Wellington at 4:15. By Tuesday morning, every brand deal Megan had was gone. Her assistant, a 24-year-old named Sophia, who had been managing Megan's content calendar for 2 years, called with the final count. 12 partnerships terminated, combined annual value, $218,000. 3 companies requested the return of gifted products totaling $22,000 in retail value. A courier service would collect them Thursday. Leah Kim called Megan on Monday evening. I know this because Megan told me about it weeks later, sitting on a bench in my vineyard with dirt on her hands for the first time since she was a child. Meg, I tried to warn you. Leah's voice was gentle but firm, the voice of a friend who had earned the right to say difficult things. I asked you at the auction if your dad had agreed. I asked you about Drake's finances months ago. You told me they were worth $250 million and everything was fine. I know, Megan said. I'm sorry I didn't listen. What are you going to do? I don't know. I have $412, no job, no brand deals, and 60 days to move out of an apartment I just found out my father owned. There were paparazzi outside my vineyard gate by Tuesday. 3 cars with telephoto lenses parked along the road, hoping to capture an image of the ghost vintner in his natural habitat. I gave them what they wanted, without trying. Just walked out to check the vines in my rubber boots and Carhartt jacket, the same way I did every morning. One photographer shouted a question from behind the fence. Mr. Calloway, how does it feel to be famous? I've been famous for years, I said without stopping. You just weren't paying attention. Megan came back to the penthouse on Wednesday to begin sorting what was hers and what wasn't. The answer came quickly and brutally. The furniture was leased through a design service. The artwork was on loan from a gallery that partnered with influencers. The kitchen appliances had been gifted by a brand that had already requested their return. The closet was the worst revelation. She went through every piece of clothing she owned. Dresses from Revolve, sent for content creation. Shoes from Jimmy Choo, part of a brand ambassador deal that no longer existed. Handbags from Coach. Product seating that required social media posts she could no longer deliver. Workout clothes from Alo Yoga. Pajamas from Skims. When she separated everything that had been gifted, loaned, or purchased with money her father provided, she was left with a small pile on the bed. 2 pairs of jeans she'd bought at Target 3 years ago, an H&M sweater, a few plain t-shirts, underwear, running shoes from a clearance rack at Nordstrom. Total value of clothing Megan Calloway owned outright, purchased with money she had personally earned, $180. She sat on the floor of her walk-in closet, surrounded by designer pieces that belonged to companies that no longer wanted her name associated with their products, and stared at the pile of clothes that were actually hers. $180. 29 years old. And everything she thought she'd built was borrowed. The first morning Megan woke up truly alone. She couldn't figure out how to make coffee. She told me this weeks later, sitting in my vineyard with soil under her nails and something like shame in her voice. The machine in her penthouse was a $1,200 Italian espresso maker that had been gifted by a kitchen appliance brand 18 months ago. She'd used it exactly 4 times. Each time, her assistant Sophia had set it up beforehand, loaded the beans, adjusted the settings. Megan had only ever pressed the button. On Thursday morning, with Sophia no longer answering texts and the brand requesting the machine's return by Friday, Megan stood in her kitchen staring at the thing like it was written in a foreign language. She opened 3 wrong compartments before finding the water reservoir. She put the beans in the drip tray instead of the grinder. The machine made a sound like a dying animal, and produced a thin brown liquid that tasted like regret. It was the coffee that broke her. Not the lost followers. Not the canceled contracts. Not Julian's text message breakup or the 60-day eviction notice or the $412 in her bank account. It was standing in a kitchen she couldn't use, holding a cup of terrible coffee she'd made herself, and realizing she didn't know how to do the most basic thing that most adults do every morning without thinking. She sat on the kitchen floor and made a list. Not on her phone. On a piece of paper torn from a notebook, because her phone felt like an enemy now. Every time she looked at the screen, there were notifications. Strangers commenting on her posts. Journalists requesting interviews. Former followers leaving messages that ranged from sympathetic to savage. The list was simple. Things I don't know how to do. Cook anything beyond toast. Grocery shop on a budget. Clean a bathroom. Do laundry without a service. File taxes. Read a lease. Build a resume. Interview. For a job. She stared at the list for a long time. Then she added one more line at the bottom. Know who I am. Without someone else's money. That afternoon, her phone rang. Madison Carter. College roommate. Fellow influencer. 400,000 followers of her own. And the person Megan had considered her closest friend for 7 years. Oh my God, Meg. Are you okay? I just saw everything. I've been calling all morning. Megan put her on speaker while she packed a box of Revolve dresses for the courier pickup. I've been better. Tell me everything. What really happened? Like, from the beginning. Is your dad really worth $130 million? Is Julian really broke? Is the gambling thing true? Megan stopped folding. The questions weren't the questions of a friend checking on someone who was hurting. They were the questions of a content creator sensing a story. Madison. Why are you calling? What do you mean? I'm worried about you. Are you worried about me? Or are you worried about being the first person to get my side of the story? Silence. 3 seconds. 4 seconds. 5. Meg, that's not fair. Madison. Did you already start recording this call? More silence. Then a small click. The sound of a voice memo being stopped. Megan hung up. She blocked Madison's number without hesitation. Then she sat on the edge of her bed and scrolled through her contact list. 412 names. Influencers, brand managers, PR contacts, photographers, stylists, event coordinators. 412 people in her phone. And she couldn't identify 5 who would help her move a couch without posting about it. Her phone buzzed again. Leah Kim. Hey. Just checking in. No questions. No agenda. Just making sure you ate something today. Megan stared at the message. Leah had texted every single day since Saturday night. Never asked for details. Never referenced the viral clips or the headlines. Just simple messages. Did you eat? Did you sleep? Do you need anything? I had toast, Megan replied. Good. Tomorrow try adding peanut butter. Revolutionary stuff, Megan smiled. The first time her face had done that in 5 days. Over the next week, Megan began the slow, humiliating process of discovering how little she knew about surviving without a safety net. She went to a grocery store for the first time in years and stood in the produce aisle for 20 minutes, trying to figure out how much food $100 could buy. She learned that a single avocado cost $2 and that the organic label didn't mean anything when you had $412 between you and nothing. She tried to cook pasta and burned it. Tried to clean her bathroom and used dish soap instead of bathroom cleaner. Tried to do her own laundry and turned 3 white shirts pink. The Porsche Cayenne sat in the parking garage with a lease payment due in 11 days. A payment that would not be made because the account that made it no longer existed. She had 11 days of luxury car left. On Tuesday evening of the second week, Megan opened her laptop and typed 4 words into the search bar. Minimum wage jobs near me. The results loaded. Retail positions, food service, warehouse work. The kind of jobs she had spent her entire adult life believing were for other people. People without podcasts. People without 550,000 followers. People who hadn't been raised by secret billionaires. One listing caught her eye. A small wine shop in Street Helena. Henderson's Fine Wines and Spirits. Part-time sales associate. $14 an hour. Must be able to stand for extended periods and lift 30-pound cases. No experience necessary. A wine shop. In the valley where her father had built a $130 million wine empire. Selling bottles that might have come from grapes grown on land she'd tried to steal. She stared at the listing until the screen went blurry. The next morning, a text from an unknown number appeared on her phone. Miss Calloway. My name is Ed Henderson. I own a small wine shop in Street Helena. I saw your story on the news. I'm not going to pretend I didn't, but I also know what it's like to start over. Because I did it myself 20 years ago after losing everything in a bad business deal. If you need a job, I'm hiring. Minimum wage. Hard work. No cameras, no followers, no brand deals. Just wine and customers. Starts Monday. Megan read the message 3 times. She thought about the penthouse she had to leave in 47 days. The $412, that was now $308 after groceries and gas. The closet full of empty hangers where designer clothes used to hang. The contact list full of people who had stopped calling. She typed 2 words and pressed send. I'll be there. Then she closed her laptop, lay down on her bed, and stared at the ceiling of an apartment that wasn't hers anymore. Somewhere outside, San Francisco sparkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows she'd photographed 1,000 times for an audience that was disappearing by the hour. For the first time in 29 years, Megan Calloway asked herself the only question that mattered. Who am I without his money? She didn't have an answer. But she had a start date. Ed Henderson didn't ask questions the morning I walked through his door. He looked at my Target jeans, my H&M sweater, the dark circles under my eyes, and handed me a green apron. Registers on the left, he said. Wines on the right. Don't mix them up. That was my job interview. Henderson's Fine Wines sat on a quiet block in downtown Street Helena, wedged between a bakery and a bookstore. 1,200 square feet of oak shelving, a single ceiling fan that clicked on every third rotation, and about 400 bottles organized by region. Ed had run the place for 31 years. He was 63, built like a rain barrel, and had exactly zero interest in social media, influencer culture, or anything that required a Wi-Fi password. He was perfect. My first week was humiliating in ways I hadn't anticipated. I couldn't tell Cabernet Sauvignon from Merlot by smell alone. I mispronounced Gewürztraminer 3 times in front of a customer who corrected me each time with increasing disappointment. Ed didn't yell. He just wrote 5 varietal names on an index card. Cabernet Sauvignon, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Merlot, Sauvignon Blanc, and taped it to the register. Start with these, he said. The rest will come when you're ready. I memorized that card during my 15-minute lunch break, eating a peanut butter sandwich I'd made at 5:30 that morning. By week 2, my body was rebelling. 8 hours on concrete floors turned my feet into a landscape of blisters and dull aches. My $750 a month sublet in Calistoga, a converted garage behind a retired couple's ranch house, had a mattress that sagged in the middle and a shower with 2 settings. Cold and slightly less cold. I cooked ramen 6 nights a week, upgrading to scrambled eggs on Sundays because the grocery outlet sold a dozen for $2.19. When my Porsche Cayenne lease expired at the end of that second week, I didn't even try to negotiate. I just handed back the keys. For 3 weeks after that, I rode the Vine bus route 10 from Calistoga to Street Helena, 42 minutes each way, $1.60 per ride. Then I found a 2009 Honda Civic on Craigslist. Silver, 167,000 miles. Air conditioning that worked only when it felt like it. The seller wanted $3,500. I talked him down to $3,200 and paid in cash, 20s and 10s, I'd saved from 3 weeks of paychecks. The The driver's seat had a permanent indent from someone else's body. I didn't care. It was mine. Week 3 brought the whispers. Customers recognized me. The ghost vintner story had reached every corner of wine country, and my face tear-streaked, mascara smeared, broadcasting from a Porsche in a Meadowood parking lot, had become a meme. Some people were kind about it. A woman buying a Sonoma Chardonnay touched my hand at the register and said, "We all make mistakes, sweetheart." Others were less generous. A man in a polo shirt asked loudly if I could recommend a wine, or would you rather just steal your dad's vineyard? Ed heard it from the back room. He walked to the front, pointed at the door, and said, "Out. Don't come back." He lost 2 regular customers that month after enforcing a strict no cameras, no harassment policy. He never mentioned the cost. Something shifted in week 4. I started asking questions, not performative questions for a podcast audience, but real ones. I wanted to know why fermentation temperature mattered, why some winemakers preferred French oak over American, why old vine Zinfandel tasted different from new plantings even when the soil was identical. A winemaker from Sonoma spent 45 minutes explaining the difference, drawing diagrams on a napkin while I listened with both hands wrapped around a cup of gas station coffee. He said, "The vine remembers everything. Every drought, every flood, every season of neglect. It's all in the fruit." I thought about my father. I thought about 43-year-old vines I'd wanted to rip out for a helipad. Week 5. I deleted my podcast. All 153 episodes, including episode 147, the one titled "When Your Family Holds You Back," the one that 550,000 people had heard, the one where I'd called my father's life's work a glorified garden. Gone. Then I opened Instagram. My follower count had dropped from 550,000 to 380,000 and was still falling. About 1,000 a day. I posted one final story. A 10-second clip of my hands. No rings. No manicure. 3 small cuts from box cutter slips holding a glass of red wine against the afternoon light. No caption. No hashtag. No call to action. Then, I deactivated the account. That same afternoon, I walked into the Tractor Supply on Highway 29 and bought a red and black plaid flannel shirt for $14.99. It looked exactly like the ones my father had worn every day of my life. I wore it to work the next morning, and Ed said nothing. But I caught him smiling at the coffee machine. Week 6. 3 lunch breaks. A ballpoint pen and a sheet of lined paper torn from the Henderson's employee notebook. I wrote a letter to my father. Not a text, not an email, not a podcast monologue designed to generate engagement. A letter. My handwriting was terrible. I hadn't written anything longer than a grocery list by hand in years. I told him I was sorry. Not for the Instagram posts or the podcast episode or the lawyers or the wellness retreat or the 2-week eviction notice. I was sorry for the $300 bottle of Drake Reserve I'd praised at a dinner table while his $4 homemade wine sat untouched. I was sorry for every time I'd introduced him as a simple farmer to people who weren't worthy of standing in his shadow. I folded the letter twice and put it in the chest pocket of my $14.99 flannel. At 4 a.m, I started the Civic. The engine coughed, then caught. I drove south on the Silverado Trail, in complete darkness, headlights cutting through September fog. I arrived at the vineyard at 5:30. The Cabernet clusters hung heavy on the wire. Purple-black. Sugar levels rising. Ready. I parked where I'd always parked, next to my father's 200,000-mile Dodge Ram. I stepped out onto the dirt. My sneakers sank slightly into the volcanic soil. I walked between the rows until I saw him at the far end, kneeling beside a vine, checking the fruit the way a doctor checks a pulse. I kept walking toward him. The letter crinkled in my pocket with every step. My father didn't look up when he heard my footsteps. He was kneeling at the end of row 47, both hands cupped around a cluster of Cabernet Sauvignon, his thumbnail pressing gently into the skin of a single grape. The juice that bled out was dark, almost black, and he studied it the way a jeweler studies a stone before making the cut. The September fog hung low across the valley, turning the vineyard into something out of an old painting, and the only sound was the drip of moisture falling from leaf to leaf. I stopped 6 feet away, close enough to see the soil caked into the creases of his knuckles, close enough to smell the earth, and the fruit, and the faint trace of coffee on his breath. He'd been out here since before dawn. He was always out here before dawn. Brix is at 24.6, he said without turning around. We pick Thursday. I didn't know what that meant. 6 weeks ago I wouldn't have cared. But Ed Henderson had taught me enough to understand that Brix measured sugar content, and 24.6 meant the grapes were ready, that the vine had done everything it could, and now the decision belonged to the man kneeling in the dirt. Dad. He stood slowly, the way 61-year-old knees stand after an hour on volcanic soil. He brushed his hands on his Carhartt jacket, the same one from the Wine Spectator cover, the same one he'd worn to the Drake dinner, the same one I'd been embarrassed by my entire adult life. He turned and looked at me. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't warm either. It was the expression of a man who had been waiting and wasn't sure yet whether the waiting was over. I reached into the chest pocket of my $14.99 flannel and pulled out the letter. 2 folds. Ballpoint pen on lined notebook paper, written over 3 lunch breaks at Henderson's Fine Wines while eating peanut butter sandwiches. My hand was shaking. I held it out. He took it. He didn't open it immediately. He held it the way he'd held the grape cluster, carefully, with both hands, as if he were measuring its weight. Then he unfolded it and read. I know what the letter said because I'd rewritten it 11 times before settling on the version in his hands. It said I was sorry for calling his land just dirt. It said I was sorry for episode 147 of my podcast, for the 550,000 people who heard me call his life's work a glorified garden. It said I was sorry for the 2-week eviction notice, for the Drake lawyers, for the wellness retreat blueprints, for the Instagram stories where I'd branded his vineyard our empire as if I'd planted a single vine. It said I was sorry for the $300 wine I'd praised while his $4 bottle sat untouched. It said I was sorry for introducing him as a simple farmer to people like Catherine Drake who wasn't fit to walk his rows. And it said I understood now, not completely, maybe not even close, but I understood that the $130 million was never the point. The point was the dirt. The point was always the dirt. He read it twice. I counted. The fog shifted and a band of early sunlight broke through, catching the tops of the vines and turning the clusters into something that looked almost deliberate, almost arranged, like someone had placed each one by hand, which in a way someone had. 43 years of someone had. My father folded the letter along its original creases, slid it into the breast pocket of his Carhartt, and looked at me for a long time. His eyes were wet. He didn't try to hide it, and he didn't wipe them. He just let them be wet. The way the vines let the fog sit on their leaves without shaking it off. You drove the Civic, he said. Yes. How's the air conditioning? Intermittent. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something before a smile, the way the sky lightens before sunrise without showing the sun. Your hands, he said. I held them up. 3 small cuts from box cutters, a blister on my right palm from restocking cases, nails cut short because long nails caught on cardboard. No rings, no manicure. 6 weeks ago, these hands had held a $1,200 phone streaming live to 72,000 viewers from a Porsche in a Meadowood parking lot. Now, they smelled like packing tape and cheap soap. He nodded. Then he reached into the pocket of his jacket, not the one with my letter, the other one, and pulled out a small folding knife. He opened it, cut a single grape from the cluster at the end of row 47, and held it out to me. Tossed it. I put it in my mouth. The skin broke, and the juice flooded my tongue. Dark fruit, black cherry, something almost like iron, something almost like the soil itself. It was extraordinary. It was nothing like the $300 Drake Reserve Cabernet that I'd sipped at Crystal Stem dinners. It was rougher, wilder, more honest. It tasted like 43 years of patience. That's what dirt tastes like, he said. When you give it enough time. We stood in the row for a while. Neither of us spoke. The fog continued to lift, and the sunlight spread across the valley, illuminating the rows one by one, east to west, the way a page fills with words. Rosa Alvarez appeared at the far end of the block, clipboard in hand, and waved. My father waved back. Thursday we pick, he said again. We'll need hands. I can be here at 4. He looked at me. This time it was a real smile. Small, cautious, earned. Bring the flannel, he said. It'll be cold. He turned and walked toward Rosa, his boots leaving prints in the damp soil. I watched him go. The letter crinkled faintly in his pocket with every step, keeping time like a second heartbeat. I drove back to Calistoga in the Civic, with the windows down and the broken air conditioning off. I had a shift at Henderson's at 9. Ed would want me 15 minutes early. I had $387 in my checking account, a $750 rent payment due on Friday, and a 2009 Honda with 167,000 miles on the odometer. I had no podcast, no Instagram, no brand deals, no penthouse, and no fiancé. I had a $14.99 flannel with a dirt smudge on the right elbow where I'd leaned against a vine without realizing it. And I had a harvest to get to on Thursday. 4 a.m. Row 47. My father's vineyard. For the first time in my life. I'd be there, not because I wanted something from the land, but because the land needed something from me. Thursday came the way all important days come quietly, without announcement. Wearing nothing special. My alarm went off at 3:15. The Civic's engine needed 2 tries to start in the cold. I drove south on the Silverado Trail with the heater blowing lukewarm air through vents that smelled like dust and old upholstery. Wearing my $14.99 flannel buttoned to the collar, a pair of work gloves Ed Henderson had given me on my last day at the shop. He'd handed them to me at closing time, leather palms, canvas backs, and said, "You'll need these more than I do tomorrow." Then he'd paused and added, "You're a decent wine clerk, Megan. Don't let that go to your head." I arrived at the vineyard at 3:58. 2 minutes early. The fog was thicker than Saturday. I couldn't see past the 3rd row, but I could see lights, dozens of them, headlamps, flashlights, the orange glow of a coffee thermos being poured in the dark. Rosa Alvarez had assembled the harvest crew. 40. 2 workers, most of whom had been picking these vines longer than I'd been alive. They stood in clusters near the equipment shed, breath visible in the cold air, speaking quiet Spanish, sharpening curved harvest knives on whetstones that fit in their palms. My father was already at row 1. Of course he was. He wore the same Carhartt jacket, the same rubber boots, the same 200,000-mile expression of a man who had never once asked the sun to wait for him. He held a pair of pruning shears in his right hand and a clipboard in his left. When he saw me, he nodded once and pointed to row 47. "Start there," he said. "Work toward me." I understood what he meant. Not just the instruction start at 47, move inward, meet in the middle. I understood the metaphor. Maybe he intended it. Maybe he didn't. With my father, the practical and the poetic had always been the same thing. The first cluster I cut felt like a small act of faith. The shears bit through the stem with a clean snap, and the grapes fell into my palm heavy, cool, alive. I placed them in the harvest bin the way Rosa had shown me during a 5-minute tutorial at 4 to 10. Gently, without crushing, stems aligned. My technique was clumsy. The worker next to me, a woman named Elena, who was 64 years old and had picked these rows for 27 consecutive harvests, could fill a bin in the time it took me to cut 6 clusters. She didn't say anything about my speed. She just hummed a song I didn't recognize and occasionally adjusted my grip without breaking her own rhythm. By 6 a.m., the fog began to lift, and I could see the full scope of the operation. 42 people moving through 3,200 acres of vineyard in coordinated silence. Bin after bin filling with Cabernet Sauvignon that would become wine worth, according to the portfolio I'd once tried to steal, somewhere between $85 and $300 a bottle, depending on the vintage and the label. My father's label. Callaway Heritage Estates. The empire that lived behind an iron door, built by a man in muddy boots who never once put his name on a magazine cover voluntarily. At 7:30, Rosa called a break. Long tables had been set up between rows 12 and 13, covered with white paper tablecloths, held down by rocks at the corners. The spread was simple: thermoses of coffee and hot chocolate, baskets of pan dulce from the Mexican bakery on Main Street, sliced oranges, hard-boiled eggs, and a cast-iron pot of beans that someone's grandmother had started at midnight. No Drake Reserve Cabernet, no crystal stemware, no Instagram-worthy charcuterie arranged by a stylist. Just food, earned by hands that had been working since before dawn. I sat at the end of a bench next to Elena. She handed me a cup of coffee without asking if I wanted one. It was black, slightly burnt, served in a paper cup with no sleeve. It was the best coffee I'd ever tasted. Across the table, Rosa was reviewing the morning's count with my father. They'd harvested 11 tons since 4 a.m. The target for the day was 28. They were ahead of schedule. My father caught my eye across the table. He raised his paper cup. I raised mine. No speech. No toast about legacy or redemption or the importance of family. Just two paper cups lifted in cold morning air, held for a beat, then lowered. Elena noticed and said nothing. Rosa noticed and pretended she didn't. We picked until 5 p.m. 13 hours. My back ached in places I didn't know had muscles. My hands, even inside Ed's gloves, were raw and stiff. I'd filled 31 bins. Elena had filled 94. But Rosa told me quietly that 31 was respectable for a first harvest, and that Elena was not a normal human being. The total for the day was 31 tons, 3 above target. Rosa credited the early start and the weather. As the crew packed up and the trucks carried the last bins to the crush pad at Winery 4, my father walked to the Dodge Ram and opened the passenger door. On the bench seat sat a brown paper bag and 2 bottles of wine. The bottles were unlabeled, no foil, no marketing, just glass and cork and liquid. He handed me one. Lot 9, he said. 31 months in American oak. Same one I brought to the Drake dinner. The $4 wine. The one I'd ignored while praising the $300 bottle across the table. The one that Richard Drake's guests had smirked at. I held it like I was holding the letter I'd given him on Saturday carefully, with both hands, measuring its weight. I want you to come to dinner, he said. Sunday. The house. Just us. What are you cooking? Tri-tip. Rosa's beans. Corn from the garden. I'll bring the wine. He looked at the bottle in my hands. You already have it. I drove back to Calistoga in the dark with the bottle on the passenger seat, secured by a folded flannel so it wouldn't roll. The Civic's odometer read 167,384 miles. My checking account held $387. My rent was due tomorrow. I had no podcast, no Instagram, no followers, no brand deals, no penthouse, no Porsche, no fiancé, and no $13,000 monthly transfer from a father I'd tried to evict from his own land. But I had a bottle of $4 wine, an invitation to Sunday dinner, and 31 bins of Cabernet Sauvignon that I'd cut from the vine with my own hands. I had blisters that matched Elena's. I had a flannel that smelled like grape juice and volcanic soil. And I had a father who, after everything, the lawyers, the eviction notice, the podcast episode, the live stream, the Instagram stories, the Drake scheme, the 2-week ultimatum, had handed me a pair of pruning shears and pointed me toward row 47. He didn't say, "I forgive you." He didn't need to. The row said it. The harvest said it. The unlabeled bottle on my passenger seat said it louder than any words could. Some people inherit empires. Some people build them. And some people, the lucky ones, The ones who almost lose everything before they understand anything, get the chance to earn their way back to a single row of vines and a dinner invitation from a man in muddy boots. My name is Megan Calloway. My father is worth $130 million. And the most valuable thing he ever gave me was a $4 bottle of wine and the chance to pick grapes in the cold.